Welcome to the show, Kirk Chisholm. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Marcus. This will be fun.
So I'm sure they already know about your illustrious background here. You actually joined me before in a previous podcast, and the year was 2017, and we were not arguing about renting versus buying, but people are still arguing about renting versus buying, and so I thought it'd be good to bring it on back. A few things have changed. We navigated our way through a pandemic, for example. And you and I were able to reconnect, I think, where we might have even originally started back at FinCon 21. I think we originally connected at San Diego 16. I believe I was trying to decompress as an introvert in the bar. You might have been doing the same, or maybe you were going for the beer. Accidentally stumbled in and had to have a conversation with me. We've been connecting ever since. And we're actually able to, for the listening audience, connect again in person. With all the appropriate orientations and things like that. Now, mind you, I'm in Texas, so we don't follow a lot of rules out here. but we were able to talk and connect again, and I've got you back on the podcast. So the quote that I think had everyone fired up, I think I've got the exact quote here. If you rent a home, it is an expense. When you buy a home, it is an expense. Only when you buy a home and rent it out to a third party does it become an investment. So we're coming in hot. Do you still feel that way, or what, if anything, has changed?
110% in agreement of that quote still. I mean, the real estate market will change over time. It'll go up and it'll go down, but the dynamics are still the same for the same reasons. Real estate is one of my favorite investments when it's an investment, but my home is a personal expense. It is not an investment. An investment is something that you can gain value in, which we can talk about this for sure. But if I'm not renting it out, I'm not getting any income. You might say, well, what about the appreciation? Okay, there's some benefits to the appreciation aspect, but the reality is you also got a ton of expenses there. And if you really do the math, it's not really an investment. I know all of the other influencers out there are telling you it's an investment. It's just not. So, I hate to burst people's bubble, but that's kind of the reality of it.
I know you had a blog before. I don't want to put you too on the spot because I honestly don't have it in front of me, but do you at least have some high level breakdown of what that math looks like?
I do actually put together a calculator for those who are so inclined, who are into the math of it. But, I'll start with this kind of overlay because I think it's important. So I think everybody's heard about the American dream of owning a home. Well, that was a marketing campaign designed by Fannie Mae. That's where that started. And the politicians love it because it sounds great and makes everybody feel warm and fuzzy about owning a home. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Whether you rent or whether you buy is a complicated issue. It's not just a financial issue. It's an emotional issue, right? So we're right now, Marcus and I are talking about the math. And I think I want to talk about the emotional side of it first, because I know everyone out there is going to say, you know what? I don't care. That tree in the backyard, I'm willing to pay more for that. I want to buy the house because I love that tree. That's okay, right? That has meaning for people. People want to feel that sense of ownership. But the reality is when you do the math, it doesn't work out that way. So let's talk about some of the aspects of owning a home. Because I know, Marcus, you wanted to talk about the math. So let's talk about the math.
Sure.
So when you're looking at buying a home, there's many things that come into play. Okay. So let's look at the asset and liability side first, right? So there's the asset. The home's an asset. Let's use round numbers. Let's say the home's $100,000. And if you can find a home worth $100,000 right now, let me know. I'd love to buy one.
I'm thinking South Texas. Might even further south.
Really south. Yeah. So, you've got the asset side of it, right? Which is, all right, it's worth $100,000, but maybe you have a mortgage on it. So it's an asset, but you also have a liability. So the mortgage is a liability. So let's say your typical 80-20, right? You put down 20,000, you have a mortgage for 80,000. So you've got some leverage. That's great, right? You only have 20,000 at risk. But this is a home you live in, so it's a little bit different than an investment. So putting down 20,000, you have the risk of you live there, right? That's an added risk. So the banks don't mind you putting down 20% because they know you have this sense of ownership and that pride of ownership. So, but you have the benefit of that $100,000 changing with market conditions. So as long as the real estate market's going up, then you're getting that benefit. I know a lot of people point to that and say, yeah, my house is going up in value. And that's great. But with that asset and with that liability also come, income and expenses. So you have expenses for paying for the mortgage, which is usually one of the bigger expenses. You've got taxes. You've got CapEx, or, things break, you have to fix them, is the simple way to explain that. You got insurance, you got water bills, you've got, also utilities, depending on the house and what you've got. There's all sorts of expenses that kind of come down that line. One of the big things I think people underestimate is the cost of owning a home, which is like the CapEx, things breaking, right? You should really put about 1% a year into your house on average. That's kind of the industry average of what you should consider, about 1% a year. Now, if you're doing that and you're adding up all the numbers, at the end of the day, you're looking at it and saying, where's all this money I'm making? Because it's not going to show up. If you're looking at a 20-year, 30-year ownership, then you could probably argue maybe you get some positive benefit from owning it. But if you actually run the numbers like I did, it's not as clear-cut as you might think.
And that's what's available, and we get this in the show notes if true, is that's what's available at the calculator that you put together? They can run those numbers?
Yep. So it's an Excel spreadsheet. Everything's built in. It allows you to manipulate certain features because every home's different. And it allows you to analyze things from different angles. So you can use it and you can say, all right, if I rent this, if I buy it, what are the differences? And I will point out a little nugget that I figured out a few years ago. Depending on your area, if you own a home in Massachusetts anyway, above 750,000, right around there, it is cheaper to rent it than to own it. But if it's under that, it's cheaper to own it. It's cheaper to own it than rent. So there's a dynamic there when you get into the high end of the market as well.
Yeah, and you had mentioned that on our previous interview. So I'll keep with that train of thought, and then I'll have a follow-up question. I think in that scenario you were using, I want to say 1.2, might have been 1.4. I'm tossing out HGTV numbers, it feels like. Yeah. Not 1.2, you are. 1.4, just rounding here and there. But it's a significant difference. You were saying to rent, correct me if these numbers are off, I think it was the difference between 4,000 versus 9,000, a rent versus a mortgage?
The example I used was actually a real example from back then when I did this blog post, but $1.4 million house, Massachusetts, in a suburban town. And I think it was about renting that house because the house was actually on the market for rent and for purchase. That's why we have these numbers. Yeah. And if I were to buy it, it would cost 3 times as much to buy it than it would be to rent it. 3 times as much.
Yeah, and I wanted to drive that home so people don't think this is like a rounding error that we're talking about especially for high-end properties. And, we were joking then, and you can still joke now. It seems like they've only expanded my fiance's into, well, she would say we're both into flip and flop. So they go in there, they're like, oh yeah, we're going to add a sink. And now this $145,000 house is worth $300,000. I was like, I don't think that's how it works in the real world, but whatever. Forced appreciation. But yeah, these are real numbers. And like, I think we're seeing it. I just quoted, cause somebody told me I was wrong. The numbers for Austin, the median housing price in Austin, which is expensive for Texas, but cheap for the country, is $515,000. It's like the highest it's ever been. And so I want people to kind of be aware, because my audience in this case, quite literally spans the globe, but definitely the United States. The other point that I didn't want to detract from too much is the emotional side of it. And I want to go back to that conversation because that was the first time I had heard it put that way when you brought it up on the podcast, but that, whether it's Fannie Mae or the government, whomever, but they created this American dream, the emotional side of that. Can you expand on that a little bit, just in case that's the first time someone's hearing that here as well?
Yeah, it's not something that's, it's funny because I think we don't realize how much of our culture comes from advertising. And, I read this book called The Power of Habit, and they talked about people actually starting to use a toothbrush for the first time. I think it was because when, I think it was World War I or World War II or one of the wars where the soldiers had notoriously bad teeth, and it was a problem. Like it was a health problem for the military. And they wanted to get people to take better care of their teeth and end up being an advertisement. And the reason we brush our teeth is partially because some company advertised that you should buy our toothpaste and our toothbrush. So to me, it's not surprising, but I think we don't realize how much of our culture and our thinking comes from advertising. And this is a case of that, where Fannie Mae had an advertisement out there that, own a home. It's the American dream. They're trying to make money, and they were promoting that. And I think it's great. I think it's done a lot of good for our culture and for people and for their financial well-being. But I think people still need to realize that it was a marketing effort, and not everybody should own a home. I know I just caused some people to pull their hair out of their head, but not everybody should own a home. It's not for everybody. I think 2008 was a good example of that. You don't need to own 5 homes with no money down. And some people for different reasons, like I'll give you an example. Right now I'm renting. I own a home, but I'm renting because I'm in transition. Mm-hmm. And we may rent for the next 10 years because it's like half the cost. If I were to buy a home, it would cost me twice as much right now to own it than to rent it. So why would I own it?
I think it's also good to hear, especially for probably the age of my listening audience, because so many people can't. Even for the group of individuals who want to own a home, they simply cannot either come up with the 20% deposit. I know there's 0% down and other options to do so. So I think that's a good aspect to keep in mind. The next interview I'm going to have here is about the Great Resignation, and I was pulling some facts for that because millions of people quitting their jobs as it relates to the outcomes of the pandemic and just looking for different purpose in life. But one of those stats I brought forward was that the average age for an entrepreneur is 42, and that the average millionaire, I believe, was 50 for men. It's a little bit older for women due to obviously some other issues. But I think it's good for people. I'm an auditor, so I always go to the facts. You and I, we always go to the numbers. It's easy for us to check into it. But I think it's good for people to hear, like, you're not failing. This is the greater reality is people are struggling with these numbers just like you are.
Yeah, and I think the reason I bring up the rent first buy, it's really important because we're all stuck in this mental model that we're a failure if we don't own a home. And, well, Jimmy down the street owns a home, and I don't. I'm a failure. And I think women especially have this ingrained in them. They want to feel like they're successful. They want to feel like they own something and they can do whatever they want with it. And that's fine. I don't detract that from people, because part of this is we as human beings all have this ingrained in us because, like women, for instance, that nesting, like they want to create something that makes them happy. And not to take anything away from men, they do too, but there's a human aspect of this that is in all of us. And I get that, but I think we need to stop comparing ourselves to other people. And that's a huge problem in our society. We all compare ourselves to others, and you shouldn't be comparing yourself to others. You should be comparing yourself to yourself. Are you your best you? And that's how you should be comparing yourself in life. And you'll be much better off for it. You won't make silly mistakes like FOMO that everyone else partakes in. Because the challenges that I see is real estate has basically, not get on too much of a rant, but the Federal Reserve has printed in a massive amount of money to bail out everybody, basically. during COVID, during the real estate bubble, during tech bubble. I mean, just nonstop, the Federal Reserve has been bailing people out and caused an asset bubble. Now, right now, depending on when this goes live, we have a good amount of inflation, but we haven't since 2008. We haven't had much at all. And recently we have, which is pushing the prices further and further out of reach of new home buyers. So the thing is once you have your entry level home, real estate is going to appreciate. So even if you're upgrading your home, let's say you're going from a $100,000 home to a $300,000 home, let's say you're moving to a better neighborhood or whatever it is. If you're doing that, it's easy to do because real estate is going to appreciate along with your income. So maybe you're not able to save the full amount for the $300,000 home, but your $100,000 home is going to appreciate and is going to bring you closer to that amount. So you can make that down payment, and it's easier to stay in the real estate game if you're in it. The problem is if you don't get in it, then you have to come up with this huge chunk up front. I mean, think about it. You're buying $1 million home. You got to come up with $200,000. I mean, that's not easy. Yeah. Plus whatever else you have for the cost of the transaction. And, even for $100,000, I mean, you come up with 20 grand. I mean, for a lot of people, that's hard to do. So the starter home is a great way to get in with the real estate and to get into this kind of these different phases as you grow and as you grow your family and you want a bigger home and all that. All of that's great. But the problem is real estate has gotten so expensive right now across the board. And it's almost not affordable for a lot of people, so that the starter homes are no longer starter homes. That if somebody's new and they don't have a big down payment, it's really hard to get into that property. So if that's the case, then you don't get started, and that means you're a permanent renter because you can't ever save up enough for a down payment. So it's gotten a lot harder for people especially younger people who are trying to get their first home. It's really hard to get started in that. I mean, I empathize completely. It's a really hard challenge. And, the people a lot of people, I live in the Boston area, a lot of people around here have money, family money. So they, their family helps them buy a home. And that's really the only way a lot of people can keep that going, because they can't save up enough money on their own to buy that house.
Yeah, I believe, you're right. I'm not sure when this episode will drop, but I'm sure this quote that I'm about to say will still be relevant. I think it was Business Insider. They were saying that the upper wealthy who are moving up. And so there's two articles that came out, because now this is related. 89% of the stock market is owned by 10% of individuals was the updated number for 2021. And I assume within that same, or probably even the upper echelon of that 10%, a lot of them were buying homes as a tax write-off, but they're buying it for their children. Again, perpetuating that wealth cycle. And I'm not here because this is going to drop on YouTube, and the commenters there are a little bit more interesting ones than some of the ones on the internet. I'm not here to say good, bad, or indifferent, or I'm not here to take down the billionaires or eat the rich. I'm just quoting the stats and the facts that were out there. And one of the ways I'm going to delve into that is two ways. I'm going to take two paths into this. So a quote that I had shared several years ago, and I was surprised how long it took me to find. It was from 538. And they had done some analysis, and it's not tracked this way. It's like trying to find how many students graduate from college. They're very interested in enrollment. They're really bad at tracking graduation rates, because that makes the school look bad. And it's less than about 30% for folks who are interested in that for most campuses. Same thing with home ownership. So they had to go in 538. They had to go and look at like mortgage asset ownership, something, because mortgages are sold and repackaged so much as well. But basically they estimated that less than 1/3 of individuals ever pay off a mortgage within their lifetime, these 30-year mortgages, between the refinancing and tapping into the equity, or like you said, in a potentially positive way, but using it as leverage for starter home to your next home and your next home. But folks just upgrade. So on the back end of that, of course, you're seeing upwards of 40, 50, 60% of people going into retirement with a mortgage. And I wouldn't say that was unheard of, but you used to, my grandparents' home generally implied that they lived in it and it was paid off, but you're not seeing that anymore. So it's just been, for me, it's fascinating. These things are interesting to me, watching these stories unravel, especially some of the the American dream fabrics, if you will. I wouldn't say in real time because it's been a slow train wreck, but just seeing, I'm like that is fast. That was fascinating to me 20 years ago, and now seeing where that train is on that track or off that track is fascinating to me as well. Your